my name is Sara Abdaless and I am the Associate Dean Education Student Experience in the Business School. And as I've mentioned, I'm one of the co-principal investigators in this project alongside Mike and Steve. And this project has been focusing on investigating collaborations between civil society organisations, so be it a charity, advocacy, campaigning organisations and trade unions. So the key aim of the project is to ascertain what makes collaboration effective. So what are the factors that make collaboration effective? What are the factors for success of collaborations? And finding ways of improving collaboration going forward, learning from instances where it hasn't gone so well. So both cases are very important for the study and equally informative. So the research has been funded in part by a grant from the British Academy and forms part of an academic research project being jointly undertaken by London South Bank University and the University of Portsmouth. So far in the project, we have conducted 15 preliminary interviews with key informants and stakeholders from both trade unions and civil society institutions. And that was in the latter part of 2023. Slides are not moving. Okay, have the slides moved? No? Can you see the next slide? No, you can't see the next slide. Okay, right. We'll just try to share again. Sorry. You think by now I've really mastered MS Teams sharing? Obviously not. Okay, let's try. Is that better? Can you see the slides now? Yes. Yeah. So slide number 2. Excellent. So I'll move on swiftly to slide number 3. So as I mentioned, the study has been conducted so far, collecting data from 15 preliminary interviews with various participants from both trade unions and various organisations in civil society. We've also conducted surveys of trade unions and civil society organisations, and obviously you have all kindly participated in one way or another to those surveys, or your organisations have. So far, we have generated a report on survey findings, and that report has already been circulated to the participants of the research, and that was done earlier on in March 24, so earlier this month. So today's webinar is going to try and highlight some of the key findings and also exploring any further issues related to collaboration with you, the participants in this workshop, but also just generating discussion points related to what works for a collaboration and any further comments that you may have around collaboration between different elements of civil society. I'm also going to be talking briefly about the next stage of the study, namely where we're going to be heading next in terms of data collection, and that will be me coming back at the end of this presentation and workshop. Now I'm going to hand over to my colleague Steve, who's going to present some key findings.
Yeah, thank you, Sara. So it's just my job in this part of the webinar just really to provide an indicative overview of some of the key findings from the survey phase of the research. Indicative because the key detailed findings are actually in the report itself, so we don't want to repeat that. But generally, in terms of the relationships and collaboration between civil society organisations and trade unions, the survey research found that there's generally positive attitudes towards positive relationships that exist between civil society organisations and trade unions, and scope for collaboration. So civil society organisations are generally positive about trade unions, and quite a lot of support exists for closer relations with trade unions. The survey showed, for example, over 2/3, 68% of the civil society organisation respondents said their organisations were sympathetic to trade unions, for example, and a significant minority of civil society organisations, 40%, collaborate with unions on an ongoing basis, according to the respondents in the survey. And likewise, most trade unions also claim to have a good relationship with civil society organisations. They see civil society organisations as important, or collaboration with civil society organisations as important, and something that they would like to extend. Some data, key data from the survey, show us an overwhelming support for statements that unions are sympathetic, that civil society organisations are natural allies of trade unions, for example. So 87% of trade union respondents actually seeing civil society organisations as natural allies, and 93% of the trade union respondents indicated that their trade union was sympathetic to the activity of civil society organisations. So positive relationships and scope for collaboration, and positive experiences of collaboration, or attitudes towards collaboration rather, come across very strongly from the survey findings. And when it comes to the areas of collaboration, then what the survey of civil society organisations and the survey of trade unions showed was an specific areas of collaboration seemed to be more commonplace around issues such as equal rights, civil and political rights, health, education and training, poverty and welfare issues, and also issues around climate change and migrant rights as well. So next slide, please, Sara. And so what I wanted to do now is really just open up for any comments or feedback from participants themselves. Do you generally concur with this positive picture of relationships between civil society organisations and trade unions? In what sense do you have good experiences of collaboration yourself? If you're a trade union respondent, do you have positive experiences of collaboration with civil society organisations to report? And if you're a civil society organisation respondent, vice versa? And perhaps reflect on the circumstances in which collaboration occurs. Any thoughts about how collaboration typically operates and what structures exist to facilitate collaboration? So I think this is part of the webinar where we'll be particularly interested in responses and experiences of participants. So you're welcome to share your views if you wish. Thank you, Kate.
Hi, my name's Kate Moran and I work for Maternity Action, which is a UK charity that campaigns for welfare benefits and employment rights, maternity and parental rights. But we also have a second strand of work, which is around migrants and asylum-seeking women who are being charged incorrectly for NHS maternity services. So my main focus, I actually come from a trade union background, so for over 30 years I worked in a health trade union. And then started working at Maternity Action 5 years ago. And part of my remit was to try to build up an affiliation programme with trade unions. So obviously I'm coming from a kind of background where I'm going to have a very positive view towards trade unions. And because I'd worked with Maternity Action in my trade union role, I'd seen the benefits of the work that they did, how that can help trade unions. So I think the affiliation programme has been really successful. We've got 25 national unions affiliated to us, and we're now building up a number of branches as well and regions from some of the bigger unions. But I think it's very much two-way traffic. On the one hand, you know, we can put bids into the unions for funding support for particular projects. The fact that we have a number of solicitors with expertise in maternity and parental rights means that we can give trade union colleagues accurate information. We can write briefings for them. We can comment on briefings that they've written. So we've done quite a lot of collaborative work, and also done things like I've written a toolkit for trade union reps on supporting the health, safety and well-being of pregnant women and new mothers in the workplace, which again, we got some funding contributions from unions, which has enabled us to make that freely available on our website, but we can also do bespoke versions for unions, which have got case studies and so on that are particularly relevant to their members and the kind of sectors and conditions that they work in. So from my perspective, I think it's been really good. It's taken a while to build it up, but the fact that we do that, and we also hold quarterly meetings of the trade unions, again, they're just an hour long, they're virtual, so they're easy to attend. And we talk about some of the campaigning issues that we are working on. So we also can get our messages out. So from something as basic as a survey that we're currently doing on how the cost of living crisis has impacted pregnant women and new mothers when they go on a period of maternity leave and experience that sudden drop in income, to also getting the messages across to a much wider membership than we could hope to, just through our social media, about the campaigns that we're running and the kind of actions that people can take to support them. So that's just kind of a brief sort of overview of some of the work that we've done, and I think it's been really successful.
That's really interesting, Kate. Thanks very much. I was particularly interested to hear about the toolkit, because there's something that we'll talk about maybe in a moment. Is one of the key areas, or to keep the key, I suppose, example of collaboration that came from our research was around building knowledge, building expertise, and devices like toolkits as collaborative devices between unions. Those of the kind you mentioned seem to fit in very well there, and also the point you raised about surveys as well, and about trying to generate knowledge, and collaboration being about promoting and advancing knowledge about particular issues and challenges and problems, which I thought was very interesting. Thank you, Kate. Did we have a hand up from Laura from Parkinson's? I saw another hand go up, but I'm not sure. It may have gone down again. I'm not used to Teams. We often work on Zoom, so
yeah.
Indeed, the hand is up.
Yeah, my hand did go up. Thank you, Steve, and thank you for inviting us along to this. Similar to the last contribution, I used to work in the trade union movement, and so have an affinity with the trade union movement. And so when I started at Parkinson's UK just over kind of 10.5 years ago, looking for opportunities, I must admit it's maybe not quite as systematic as the past speaker in terms of the work that we do with trade unions. It tends to be on a campaign by campaign basis, as opposed to actually seeking that greater that kind of greater collaboration in terms of opportunities. But I suppose we also work with professional organisations which may not be classed as kind of trade unions as well, certainly in terms of the health kind of sector. We tend to work around health and care services and benefits and welfare, and that's where kind of our collaborations tend to be, and particularly on that knowledge gathering, so surveys and promoting them with not just our community, but also with other kind of trade unions who may be able to kind of push them out, recognizing that people may be members of trade unions and live with Parkinson's and have family members or others that kind of live with Parkinson's. And I think that's something that we as an organization is trying to kind of get our head around, how we actually broaden our appeals so that we're not just talking to the people that we have continued to talk to for kind of many years in terms of the Parkinson's community that are known to us, but actually how we can reach out and maybe use trade unions as another way of kind of communicating some of our messaging, how they can get support for living with Parkinson's, particularly around employment issues. And I think that's an area where maybe we need to do a little bit more work, as we are seeing more younger people diagnosed with Parkinson's and potentially having to stay in the workforce longer, and making sure that actually employers and and we're working with trade unions to make sure that employers have a better and more sensitive kind of approach to workers. We've also worked with health organisations, in particular the Pharmacy Defence Association, which I know is a trade union around things like prescription charges and kind of the workforce. And I suppose to answer some of your questions rather than just chat blithely on, I think that in terms of the structures, whether there are structures that exist to facilitate collaboration, I'm not convinced that there are at this moment in time, and there's maybe still a little bit of mistrust between trade unions and civil society organisations, but I think that there's definitely a sense that the last 13, 14 years with the Conservative government has to a certain extent pitted us all against and actually we're probably all in a similar, if not same boat. So we probably are all working together, but we don't have formalized structures, and so maybe there is something that we can do to kind of build up some of those formalized structures to help us to kind of better organise, better agitate, and better deliver for people living with Parkinson's and other long-term conditions, but also for workers as well. So yeah, I think there's definitely more that we could be doing, and I can imagine that will be similar for kind of trade unions. It's just, I think that the time that we've got and the variety of attacks there have been from the government mean that we haven't necessarily been able to focus on developing those relationships. We've been very much in kind of firefighting mode.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. And the point, I think, the point which other participants might well reflect on about thinking about kind of structures and more formalized structures. There may be reflections on what might constitute those formalized structures and what form they might take and what they might look like, and that might be that there might be scope for that from interventions and responses from other participants. But I think Amanda, did you have your hand up?
I did, yes. So apologies for joining people late, but yes. So Amanda has the head of employee engagement and reward at Dimensions. Social care. We support people with learning disabilities and autism. We're around 6,000 headcount. So I feel, so not thinking about formal structures as such, but I think we have very much a sort of positive and quite active relationship with our recognised union, and I feel that the various opportunities for collaboration really do flow from there. So that's how I would describe things here. As I say, the forum itself is active. We have all trained sort of representatives or colleagues. We have a dedicated union convener role, and sort of written into our recognition agreement is the way that we'll operate, and every now and again we sort of check, well, do we think we're sort of, operating in the way that we promise, and all of those sorts of things. And it really feels that things flow from there. So for instance, we do work alongside the union, sort of trying to influence externally and better pay and more professionalisation of social care for our support workers, particularly on pay. As I say, recently, a lot of activities, and to the extent that our frontline colleagues are involved in representing their own position with MPs. So it feels like we're really, as I say, those opportunities are coming from that arrangement that we have and the relationship, and many other things too. Our regular meetings, we have, for instance, we'll sort of sign up to the union's charter on race equality, work on projects, whatever is particularly an important topic, we'll work together on. So yeah, I hope that's useful, so I can sort of elaborate a bit more, but that it feels, as I say, not necessarily a formal structure, because it feels like it's there, and it all flows from that agreement and the way things work on a day-to-day basis. it's fairly embedded, and it's just hugely important, you know, to understand each other. And as I say, these opportunities then really do seem to work well, and people are possibly beginning to listen. We hope.
Oh, good. Yeah, I mean that's really interesting, Amanda, because one of the things we know is that sometimes the collective bargaining relationship between civil society organisations and trade unions can be conflictual. What's really interesting about your contribution there is you've highlighted how an embedded recognition agreement can actually generate collaboration in a mutually beneficial way. Would that be right, Amanda?
I really do think it does, honestly.
Yeah.
Yes, I can really say that. Yes, I do believe that. Yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Amanda. And did Caitlin, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, my name's Caitlin Boswell. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Manager at JCWI. We're a migrants' rights organisation. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear kind of the collaboration examples going on in other organisations. At JCWI, I lead our migrant workers campaign, which is basically fighting for everyone to have the right to kind of safe and dignified work regardless of their immigration status. And as a big part of that campaign has been trying to strengthen and build on the relationships that we have with unions, but also the relationships between the wider migrant sector and unions, as a way to both push unions to kind of do more and say more and to kind of around migrants' rights, but also to ensure that we are collaborating and sort of advancing the same goals, basically. And so some of the ways that we've been doing that, we ran a series of roundtables that brought together unions, kind of big national unions and small grassroots ones with kind of migrants and grassroots organisations in the migrant sector, looking at the rights of platform workers. And then we also ran a specific roundtable looking at which kind of provided a platform for some lived experience grassroots migrants organisations to speak about how they felt that unions could best support precarious and undocumented migrant workers. And that was a really good way that the unions could also share the work that was already happening and that they're already doing, kind of good practice around supporting migrant workers most effectively. We also coordinated last January a pledge that was signed by 22 unions, kind of, again, a mix of big national ones and smaller unions, pledging their support for migrant workers' rights, which kind of outlined things like recognising undocumented workers as workers and as an essential part of the union movement, and joining the kind of call for an end to hostile environment policies in the workplace that put migrant workers at disproportionate risk of workplace exploitation and things like that. So that was really promising. And then similarly to that, back in, I think it was the summer last year, when the government announced that they would fund a public sector pay rise, but off the backs of migrants through increasing visa and NHS fees, we kind of pulled together, it was over 80 mix of unions and migrants' rights organisations to make a statement saying that we completely support the need for a public sector pay rise, but it shouldn't come off the backs of migrants. And that was a really, again, like kind of nice example of collaboration across the sectors. But this is always an area that we're kind of trying to do more on. So we're also trying to have lots of one-to-one meetings with unions, just get to know what they're doing more and how we can work together better. And we're hoping to set up some kind of a working group, especially in the run-up to a general election.
That's very very symbiotic relationship. That's some very interesting examples of collaboration there. Thank you, Caitlin. Sara, do you want to say something?
Yeah, it's more Mike.
Yes, I was just wanting to come in a moment on the structure issue. I mean, one of the things that was noticeable when we contacted both CSOs and unions is often they didn't know who to initially refer us to talk about the issue of collaboration with the other partner. There were some exceptions. I mean, some unions actually had a national official responsible for relations, but that tended as Steve has indicated, that tended to be related to collective bargaining and not collaboration in other areas. When we talk to CSOs, sometimes the initial response was to directors to talk to policy officers, people who were associated with campaigning, which again assumes a particular type of relationship in terms of collaboration. So I think there's a lot of potential to examine the structure of communications between the two sectors. I mean, one of the most important pieces of research on collaboration in the States stressed the need to have consistency in communication, that the people who did get involved in collaboration needed to work together, to trust each other, to keep going back to each other for help and support. So this area of structure, I think, is well worth focusing on, and hopefully in the next stage of the research we will dig into it a bit. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Mike. Some important points there. Thank you. And Sean, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, thank you. My name's Sean Taylor. I'm the Principal Caseworker for NSEAD. We're the National Society for Education and Art and Design, and we're a bit of an amalgam of things. We're a learned society, as well as a professional association for art, craft and design teachers. And I lead the trade union element of NSEAD, which again is a subsector of the organisation. I think an interesting point that has dawned on me as I've been listening through that, I mean, quite clearly in terms of circumstances for collaboration to occur, you know, we're all very much kind of like guided by our constitutional aims and objectives, and obviously with a name like, you know, National Society for Education, Art and Design, you know, we've got a very specific focus there. But the work of the trade union, you know, goes a lot further than that. You know, a simple look through my casework, you know, folder denotes a significant variety of different types of things that I deal with, and it was quite heartening to hear some work earlier about maternity. You know, because I'm very much ploughing a lot of this alone, and you know, and not necessarily calling on other people. I'm very much having to, you know, rely on my own things. I mean, quite clearly, collaboration is going to typically operate with regards to the areas that we have particular interest in. I mean, areas that we have focused on recently. We've just launched in the last couple of weeks a phenomenal resource for the art curriculum across the nations called the Big Landscape, and that has been a fantastic body of work where we've pulled in a lot of volunteers and members to actually contribute to that. But we've also diversified with things. We've got an organisation within NSEAD called AREA, which is the Anti-Racist Art Educators Alliance. And you know, again, I'm hearing opportunities there. But I think a valid point to make as well about trade unions is quite clearly, you know, people have heard of things like, you know, Unite or GMB, Unison, NEU. You know, there are some behemoths out there, shall we say, in terms of unions and the sizes. But the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of trade unions are actually on the smaller side. So from my perspective, you know, as much as I am very socially minded and wanting to engage a lot with a lot of social activities and a lot of these types of organisations, I've got to query, you know, a couple of things in terms of capacity. You know, I'm very much, you know, I can have the best intentions in the world, but, you know, like yesterday, I had a referral from the Teacher Regulation Agency. Everything gets dropped because I've got to prioritise in terms of dealing with member and casework, which is very limiting for smaller organisations when, you know, you just don't have that number, you know, although those numbers of staff to actually call upon. But one of the things that dawned on me quite clearly, I'm just not aware of the organisations that necessarily exist out there, the people to contact. And potentially, you know, it dawned on me, maybe the TUC could be encouraged to facilitate some kind of meeting where, you know, there could be some kind of speed dating where we actually get to know people by introducing ourselves and, you know, having some kind of networking activity along those lines, because I'm sure the opportunities could absolutely blossom from having something like that facilitated.
Yeah, a couple of very thanks very much, Sean. A couple of very important points there, and I think the issue around capacity yeah, something we'll come back to later on in this webinar, because I know we'll explore the constraints and obstacles to collaboration. And I think lack of time and lack of resources came across quite strongly. And one of the things you've identified is that's a particular issue for smaller organisations in terms of collaboration. And the second key point, the one that you finished off with about the role of the TUC, one of the things we did in the earliest part of this research is we did talk to some stakeholders at the TUC, and it may well be, you know, and one of the things when you talk to stakeholders at the TUC, of course, they often run off their feet with various things as well. But I think that kind of coordinating capacity, some kind of coordinating capacity, or forum of some kind, like or mechanisms, there might be scope for doing that. So I think that's a very interesting thing to feed back, Sean. Thank you very much for that. And Laura's just said in the chat, a TUC NCVO event would be great. So that's something potentially to take from this webinar. So thank you very much. Is there any, before we finish this part of the webinar, is there anything else anybody would like to add to what we've covered so far? If there isn't, then we'll move on to the next slide, please, Sara.
Steve, sorry. We were on mute.
No, just to say, I think the TUC NCVO event is quite realisable. I mean, we've kept in touch with the TUC throughout the project, and Paul Nowak's been sent a copy of the report. We've got an interview with the NCVO chief executive in about a month's time, and there's no reason, I don't think, why an event like that couldn't result from this kind of contact. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. And Mike, I think you're going to take over the next part of the presentation, the next part of the webinar, aren't you, Mike?
Yes. Yeah.
The next slide, please, Sara. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
I mean, the interesting thing about this slide is there was a high degree of consensus between the two sectors about the key benefits. Table 5 of the CSO responses and table 10 of the trade union responses really highlighted the same key benefits of collaboration. The campaigning dimension, the impact on government policy, and the whole area of knowledge and expertise. Although that last one, as we see from the report, covered quite a lot of areas of activity, from training to toolkits, from research being used by the other partner in their policy and that kind of thing. I suppose what I'd be interested in terms of this slide is first whether the results that it embodies, whether they chime with your experience. You know, you're all been at some stage either in unions, in some cases, quite a lot of you are ex-union people, but currently in CSOs. You've all been involved in examples of collaboration. Are those the benefits of collaboration that have come across to you from that experience? Are there any other benefits that you think are particularly important to distinguish, to add to those? So that's, I think, the main discussion point that I would suggest in relation to this area of key findings. Does it chime with your experience? Are there any other benefits of collaboration not highlighted here that you think we should be particularly taking delivery of? Kate, sorry, yes.
Yeah, just to say, in terms of sharing expertise, I think it's important to remember that not only can you share expertise between organisations, but that it's really great from our perspective that we are able to share expertise around maternity rights. So, for example, for our trade union affiliates, they can commission a series of webinars on employment rights for their members, their reps, their officers. So that means that we can really get knowledge and information out there to, you know, a much wider group of people than we would do just, you know, for example, by people trying to call up our telephone advice lines where they can speak to a solicitor for free about any pregnancy-related issues they're having in the workplace. But again, that's really limited because of funding, because of people trying to get through and struggling to get through on the phone line. But that gives us another avenue of really sharing the information widely.
All right, thank you. Joseph, you wanted to...
I just wanted to come in. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to leave early, but I'm from Prostate Cancer UK, and our engagement with unions has been such that they are, especially through conferences, a useful kind of conduit to access groups who might be at risk of prostate cancer, because there are specific groups for Black members, for instance, and if you're Black, you're at double the risk of prostate cancer. So in terms of that collaboration about health messaging, and especially when you've got, I think I'm right in saying that the majority of union members are men. I think I'm concerned I'm in a room full of experts, but okay, well there you go. But in terms of just getting messaging to men or their families who won't respond to traditional means of health messaging, it is another avenue and a sort of lever we're able to pull. So want to. I just think so.
It's facilitating you getting to the client in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if you've got a disease which is asymptomatic in its early stages, trying to convince somebody to go to a GP about something that does not cause you any harm or discomfort at that stage is problematic. So finding routes to talk to people about it, especially men at risk, is really, really important.
Thanks. Caitlin?
Yeah, I was also just going to add, and apologies if there's another section in the discussion around kind of, is it going to be later on discussing some of the challenges with collaboration, or is that, yeah, okay, I'll save it for then.
Yeah, we'll be doing. Well, I'll throw into the discussion in this area, because I did send the copy of the report to a former chief executive of the NCVO that we interviewed before we began the survey part of the project. And he looked at this area of benefits, and there was one area that he thought was missing. And the area he thought was missing was any way that CSOs can benefit from union collaboration in terms of more, if you like, more internal matters in relation to staffing. He was talking with areas like equality and diversity. He was talking about areas like training and development. He thought that most of the responses from the CSOs, the survey, were focusing on, if you like, external collaboration with the unions, not so much focusing on whether our unions had anything to contribute internally. Now, you could say that we're responsible for that in a sense, because we did stress we weren't talking about collective bargaining when we started the survey. But it's quite interesting, because there are quite a few CSO people attending, whether they think that one potential rationale for collaboration might be the impact of collaboration on the staff of the CSOs themselves. Sean, sorry, and Amanda. Sean, and then Amanda.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to hear what Joseph had to say there about reaching out. I mean, I think your comment about gentlemen very much depends on the sector. In education, it's ostensibly, the vast majority of members are women, largely because a good 70-odd% of teachers, are female or identify as female. But there are significant benefits. I've just had a quick look through some of the casework I've just been dealing with in terms of headlines, and while a lot of what I do is very nuanced in terms of education, law, school teachers, paying conditions, Burgundy book, it's very nuanced and doesn't really allow much for collaboration. There are areas where I'm routinely dealing with teachers who maybe are suffering with a disability or, ill health, retirement, or a financial issue. And I'm not FCA regulated, so I can't give financial advice, but being able to actually work in partnership with an organisation, signposting, that kind of thing think is very, very helpful. From that perspective, and obviously there are topics out there such as maternity, paternity issues, menopause. Areas where I couldn't claim to be any kind of specialist, but having a contact I could lean upon, and vice versa. There's great scope there going forward, but it's a case of just getting to know these people, isn't it, really?
Yeah. It's Angela next. Yeah, Angela, please.
Hi, I'm sorry I joined you a bit late. My name's Angela Montgomery. I'm the Assistant General Secretary from the Prison Officers Association. So in terms of our trade union members, large numbers of them are men. And what the gentleman said about prostate cancer is a big issue for our union, because our members are also generally, they're not always, not very keen to have a medical or to go to their doctor. So I know when we've got our conference coming up, and I know last year we did try to get health screening done, but it did prove to be more difficult than we would have liked. We'll probably give it another go, but I think about raising the profile is really important. But I would also say the issue of the relationship between trade unions and what I call the community not-for-profit sector, the charitable sector. Not all of them are charitable, but I think the issue becomes difficult sometimes where there's conflict, and it tends to be around paying conditions and volunteering. And I think there's a wariness from the community not-for-profit sector, but I also think in terms of trustees, there's a lack of knowledge about employment rights and how they treat their staff. And I think that is an issue, I have to say, because some places in effect pay less than the minimum wage, and as a trade union we're not really very happy with that, I suppose I would say. It's illegal, but there's that, I suppose, that line between volunteering and paid work. And I think certainly in the smaller organisations that's not so clear. But I would also say, I represented a member in the Red Cross, and actually they were in effect restructuring and reducing hours to increase the number of volunteers. Now, they're not a poor charity, whatever they say. And it was a bit shocking. It was quite shocking. It was quite difficult to get movement on that. Because despite their objectives, they don't want a trade union in their organisation. So they have a staff association. So there are all those sorts of conflicts, really, that do stand in the way, I think. So we do work closely with a lot of charities that support our members as well. So I suppose the issue is whether we can have a reciprocal arrangement. But I don't know. I'll throw that open to the floor.
Yes, in a way, I think it was quite positive in the survey that the kind of area that you're referring to wasn't seen as a bigger problem than it actually is. There was never the issue of union conflict given a priority issue in terms of obstacles. The obstacles, as we'll be coming up later, tended to be in terms of resources and time to collaborate rather than necessarily collective bargaining issues. But I think you're right to raise it, and it's probably part of the explanation to what the person I referred to raised about the survey, that there seems to be a reluctance in some CSAs to see the collaboration as internal collaboration rather than collaboration of a kind of campaigning or exchange of information outside. So I think you're right to raise it, but fortunately in the survey it doesn't seem to be as big a problem as I worried about it being at the beginning. Yeah. Sorry, Amanda, I think was...
Yes. So picking up on the colleague aspect, really, I was thinking it just before we mentioned earlier that I do think that one of the benefits that collaboration has brought is the sort of, it's built trust and confidence, I think, from our colleagues sort of in us in terms of understanding their position, and that, you know, we are, and we were open, just picking up on another point as well, we're open in terms of the financial position, and you know, of course, so that people understand our position too, but then that we will sort of stand by as such and stand by them, you know, act on their behalf almost, you know, by externally collaborating with other organisations to influence. And we hear anecdotally, I couldn't say sort of from a data point of view necessarily, although our colleague survey results, you know, have improved over the years since indeed, you know, our union relationship has, you know, become sort of more active and stronger, I would suggest, as well, that you know, relationships evolved, and so yeah, it feels like in turn, as I say, we have seen those benefits as well, because anecdotally people do say that, and the colleague forum absolutely really welcome hearing, you know, what we've done, and we, you know, we work alongside the head of public affairs and sort of external communications internally, and then just sort of, you know, pull on, as I say, various colleagues to be involved as well. So I do feel that they certainly have told us in terms of the benefits that brings to them. So hopefully internally too.
That's encouraging. Yeah. I mean, how many of the CSOs here have trade union representatives on the trustees board? Just one, I think. Yeah. I mean, do you see that as an area which could be looked at to help collaboration? Or is it a difficult area in terms of modifying composition? Uncertainty. Okay. Should we move on to the next slide?
Mike, just to note, there's a couple of comments agreeing with the previous point in the chat, just in case you wanted to note that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to Steve now.
Yeah.
Back to you, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sara, and thank you to the participants. One of the things that came up, I think, in the discussion a few moments ago was about the potential barriers to and obstacles to collaboration. And that's just something I wanted to report back, some of the key findings from the survey in relation to that issue. I think when it comes to civil society organisation, the main barriers to the development of collaboration were cited in this research were lack of time, lack of knowledge of unions, and unions not considered important enough. And that point about unions not being considered important enough, I was reflecting on that finding when it's Laura from Parkinson's was talking earlier. I've got that right, haven't I, Laura? Yeah, from Parkinson's. And, you know, seeing trade unions and engaging with trade unions and collaborating with trade unions as a potential opportunity to widen the message and to raise awareness of an issue like Parkinson's and how to tackle an issue like Parkinson's. And I thought that was particularly interesting. And one of the things that's come out in previous research, which has looked at the role of not-for-profits and charities in relation to work and employment and trade unions, is that sometimes trade unions aren't seen as relatively important, and that's particularly a function of the decline in trade union membership and power in the UK over recent years. And I think what would be interesting, and I think it's something we'll come to possibly in the next slide, is how far a change of government might influence things here as well. One of the things we know from previous research is that in the past, civil society organisations have been more receptive to collaborating with trade unions when a Labour government is in power, because Labour have got that closer relationship with the trade unions, and so trade unions can act as a vehicle for expressing concerns. And so political change might be, or the prospect of political change later this year in the UK might be important. When it comes to trade unions, when it comes to what the research findings said about trade unions, I was struck by what Angela, isn't it, from the Prison Officers Association? I've got that right, haven't I, Angela? Yeah, from the Prison Officers Association said about the difficulties over the collective bargaining relationship. And the survey did find that actually it was around 1 in 7 of the trade union respondents, 14% of our trade union respondents, did say that their experience of the collective bargaining relationship and the difficulties trade unions experience when it comes to the employment policies and practices they saw in civil society organisations, that could cause a difficulty in terms of collaboration. So I think while it's not, what as Mike said, it's not the most common barrier to collaboration cited by trade union respondents. It is there, and it is something that's very important. And I also was struck by the comments in the chat about trade unions not often being very demonstrating good practice or best practice when it comes to their employment, the employment terms and conditions of their staff too. And as a member of a trade union which is actually in dispute with its own staff, I can certainly identify with that. But as previous comments and contributions to this webinar suggested, for trade unions as well as for civil society organisations, it was lack of time and resources, the lack of capacity, which seemed to be much more important barriers to collaboration from the findings of the survey, and also a lack of knowledge of civil society organisations as well. And one of the purposes of this research, and indeed in particular this webinar, which is contributing towards the research, is to try and improve capacity building and diffuse knowledge and raise awareness in order to overcome such barriers to collaboration. So Sara, next slide, please. And so I think there's an opportunity here, because I think already, at least one participant had a potential contribution to make here. There's an opportunity here to discuss participants' experiences of barriers to collaboration. What are the barriers to collaboration? How important are they? And how potentially they can be overcome. So I'd be really interested in hearing your responses to and experiences of barriers to collaboration. Thank you, Caitlin.
Yeah, I can come in. I think one of the challenges that we've faced in the migrants' rights sector is around how kind of, particularly for grassroots migrants organisations and migrants themselves, people with lived experience, how kind of neglected they historically felt by the trade union movement, and kind of not included, despite the fact that obviously for as long as the workers' rights movement has been around, migrant workers have been kind of pushing for those rights, often at great kind of personal risk given their immigration status and that kind of thing. So I think there is a lot of very understandable either lack of trust or in some cases resentment, and that can sometimes mean that efforts now to kind of speak up for migrants' rights or sign statements and pledges or anything like that can there's a risk that can feel hollow or feel tokenistic. Yeah. And I think our role as an organisation, or what we've tried to do, is to be that kind of in between those groups and unions, to both kind of try and bring unions in, but also push them to do better than they have historically on migrant workers' rights. So that is a kind of ongoing challenge. I don't think it's something that we can say is resolved, and it has been a barrier to collaboration and can sometimes make those kind of roundtable discussions, there can be points of tension that we have to kind of manage. And so yeah, I think, and it's only probably in the last couple of years that any unions have kind of vocally or publicly recognised undocumented workers as workers, but they still can't get protection from most national unions. There's a couple of exceptions of kind of smaller grassroots unions where they just don't ask to check immigration status, or they don't ask that you have kind of formal worker status, but it's mostly impossible to get that support if you're undocumented. So yeah, that's been a kind of ongoing tension and barrier to manage.
Thank you, Caitlin. That's really interesting. And when you were talking now, I was thinking about what you mentioned, the rise of independent grassroots unions, like the Independent Workers of Great Britain and United Workers of the World, for example, which to some extent have arisen because of the neglect of conventional trade unions of migrant workers, and particularly undocumented migrant workers. And one thing, and you or another person may have touched upon this before, but in this webinar, but do you have relationships with these grassroots unions? And if you do, are these relationships better? Is there a better confluence of interest, meeting of minds, if you like, with the smaller grassroots unions than there is with the bigger, more established trade unions, Caitlin?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we've got relationships with both, like positive relationships with both, because we have a partnership with Unison. So they're obviously a big national union, and our legal team provide a free helpline for free immigration advice for Unison members. But we, at the same time, have very close and positive relationships with IWGB, as you mentioned. I think for the kind of grassroots community organisations, I think, yeah, I would say their relationships are probably stronger with the grassroots ones. However, I think in a lot of cases, what we see is those community and grassroots groups sort of almost take on the role of unions unofficially, as opposed, like, they are doing that work of supporting migrant workers in their communities, telling them about their rights, finding out that information and empowering. They're not officially unions, but they are providing that community support. Like, we've recently put out a report and a piece of research looking at the impact of the immigration system on migrant workers in the care and farming sectors. And in all the interviews we did, I mean, it's not a representative large-scale study, but people weren't aware of unions, weren't aware that they existed, or weren't aware what their rights were, but almost all of them had sought support from a kind of community group, where they might have found out their rights or found out that they could challenge their employer in whatever way. So yeah, I don't know if that's helpful, but
No, it really is useful. And I think one of the things it highlights as well, Caitlin, is the ambiguity sometimes of what is a trade union. I mean, we have formal criteria, there are formal legal criteria that apply to finding a trade union, but there can be there's not necessarily a hard and fast line between a trade union and a community organisation, and some community organisations fulfil some of the functions of trade unions. But I think that issue of ambiguity over role and function is important there. Thank you. Do you have another hand up? Is that you, Sean? Have you got your hand up?
I have, thank you. I did post in the thread that there's a best part of 6 million members of trade unions in the country, but it creates a bit of a dichotomy for me in terms of the barriers to collaboration, because you go along to most union meetings and you only need a chorus of probably 1% or even less than that to make a meeting chorus, which it shouts out loud engagement isn't particularly there. So I think unions face a number of problems in terms of how they're constituted in many respects. The ideal model is the organizational model where members are impacted, because obviously the trade union is the membership, and that's how it should work. But many members actually see the trade union as a service model, and that's what most unions have to necessarily focus on, because that's the expectation. If I'm in a bit of bother, I've got somebody to turn to, and I'm paying my insurance subs. They don't necessarily get involved as they could do. But I also think from a collaboration perspective, again, the way trade unions are constituted, when we have our annual conference, our AGM as such, the motions that get put forward there, as voted on, or as selected for by members and voted on by members, realistically, they come from a narrow sphere of influence, quite rightly so, because of what I've just previously said. But ultimately as well, the way the unions are constituted with their rules, that then becomes the focus of the energy of the union for that year. That's what they're constituted to work towards. So there is a mechanism to actually influence greater collaboration through the annual general meeting, through the annual conferences, through the motions and the voting, and getting it on the actual work of the union to focus on. Otherwise, we're just reliant more so on is this a sensible thing or a suitable thing to do? So I think a better understanding of how unions work, alongside, in terms of their constitutions and mechanisms as to how these things can be, entrenched within the union work would go a long way to actually improve collaboration.
Yeah, I think that's some really important points there, Sean. I think there's work by academics such as Jane Holgate at Leeds in the UK, and also by Meta Tapia from the US, which highlights some of the structural and cultural obstacles that can inhibit collaboration, partly reflecting some of the structural features of unions that you indicated there, Sean. So I think that's a really important point. Lubna, did you have your hand up? Hello,
I
Lubna?
did, yeah. Thank you for
Lubna.
that. Yeah, no, it's not a problem. Just as a point of reference, I'm here alongside Joe from Prostate Cancer UK, and we've just started to kind of dip our toe in working with unions, and I think probably some of the barriers that we've experienced very much in the beginning of the stages of collaborating with them is really understanding all of the processes that are involved. So it really is about demystifying how trade unions work, what needs to be done, the motions, for example. The whole motion process is, it's fascinating, but it's also incredibly insightful, and could be incredibly impactful as well in terms of instigating change for members of unions and raising really important awareness messages as well. So I think that maybe having some kind of, I know that there's manuals and guidebooks and points of reference which members have to be able to help support with particular campaigns, but maybe something which is external facing as well, so that people who are wanting to collaborate with trade unions, because there are certain points of the calendar year, for example, where trade unions may be wanting to do some activity on a given subject. And so, we are constantly working with the NHS to be able to champion the role that the third sector have in helping to support NHS health messaging, and trade unions are, they're fantastic for everything that they do and represent, and the members who are passionate about the cause as well. So I think that having that audience and being able to get into that audience as well is really important. So I think some of the challenges that we've experienced very much in the short term again is getting that national platform, because at the moment we're working within a region, and I think the expectation is then that the motions will be passed and it'll go to different committees, etc., for that piece of work to be showcased, and then for other areas to potentially take on board that piece of work. But it feels like it's a very slow process, that and is there an opportunity of doing multiple pieces of work at the same time, because there's different reflections and learnings depending on which part of the country you are, because obviously according to your geography you're at different levels of deprivation, etc. So it's not necessarily having a project in one area is going to mean that project is going to be exactly the same in another area. So it'd be nice to be able to test and learn at multiple sites simultaneously. And then also we've been working with another union who do quite a lot of conferences, Unison, and we went to the Black Members Conference earlier on this year in January. And it was fantastic. It was a brilliant opportunity to be able to share our messaging with members there. But what I noticed was that there weren't many other stall holders there, and it was really a missed opportunity, I think, for people who are in lots of different areas who want to share their messaging. So it's about what can trade unions do to be able to be more external facing and to have that to share their platform with certainly with the third sector. It was a free event for us, so it's a no-brainer for us to attend, and certainly again thinking about the audience. So it's just obviously it's a two-way process. We have to be proactive, but also how proactive can trade unions be as well in engaging with other sectors which could be of benefit to their members.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it, Lubna? And one of the things that I think relating back to the point Sean raised was that unions, because of structural considerations, have to often be quite interior facing and inward looking, and face challenges being more outward looking. I think one of the other points that you made, Lubna, which I thought was really interesting, was the point about greater knowledge and awareness of how unions operate and their structures and so on might be desirable as well. Kate, did you want to make a contribution, Kate?
Yeah, just a few things that have kind of come up in relation to what other people have said. One is that, yeah, definitely agree with the issue about having a stall at trade unions. As you said, I was at the Unison National Women's Conference, and a lot of the bigger unions like Unison and Unite do let you have a stall there for free. You don't have to pay for it. TC Women's Conference, I had a stall there as well. I've noticed actually, I mean, you do have to pay for that. It's not too expensive, but it's a great way of getting in touch and seeing, getting that face-to-face contact with people from a whole variety of different unions who are going to be activists, because that's why they're there at the conference, and gives you the opportunity to perhaps collect their contact details and then, set up a means of keeping in touch. Also around the motions, we've got a dedicated area of our website which is for trade unions, and started developing a number of motions, so to make it as easy as possible for unions to put a motion either into their branch conferences or national level to support a campaign to affiliate to us, that kind of thing. And just one other thing I was going to say was that, and again, this is a personal point of view, having worked in the trade union sector, is that you often find that the role of being a liaison person with organisations, external organisations, is kind of an add-on to somebody's role. And what you will find is that, particularly if it's somebody who's dealing with individual member queries or supporting members with grievances, disciplinaries and so on, it's always going to slip down the agenda. So I think from the perspectives of both sides, that if you are going to make this a priority, you've got to ensure that there's dedicated, protected time for somebody to be able to spend that time, because as we all said, time's always a problem, time and resources.
Thank you very much, Kate. Some very important points there. Thank you for those points. And Sara, Mike, did you have some?
Yeah, all I was going to say was that one of the briefs of this project, which we've been asked to do by the funders, is actually at the end of it prepare some detailed guidelines for the two sectors on collaboration. So a lot of the ideas that are being put forward here will be very useful. I mean, some very basic. For example, how does a CSO use a union conference? What potential is it in terms of using a conference point of view, resolutions, publicity at conference, those kinds of areas, very practical areas, I think are ones that we have to get engaged with. So more information about the process is very important.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for participants for all your contributions to this part of the survey. I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to move the presentation on now. And so Sara, next slide, please. And I think Mike's going to come back with some reflective questions.
Yes, I mean, this is an area that we've not really got data on as such, because there wasn't a big focus on this in the survey. But obviously, for the credibility of collaboration, it's a key issue. I'd really emphasize three elements of it in terms of the discussion. Obviously, how to improve collaboration. Secondly, any areas where you think particularly more attention to collaboration needs to take place. And obviously, the final one on government collaboration, etc. I mean, I'm aware that the whole issue of government involvement with CSOs is a very polemical one, both the CSOs themselves and for other organisations, including unions. So it'd be worth spending a few minutes thinking about that. But to begin with, what can be done to improve collaboration? I mean, one of the things we talked about was structural issues, for example, earlier. Are there any structural ways where CSOs and unions can improve the way they liaise and communicate with each other to introduce more stability, more consistency, and a greater long-term nature to those relationships? Bearing in mind the point that's been raised quite a few times, the resource problem, which is probably not going to get any easier in the immediate sense, but any structural suggestions that people have that might help there. Secondly, areas where we've not really talked about collaboration, where there's potential. And thirdly, if there is a general election in the next few months, if there's a change of government, what impact is that likely to have on collaboration? Okay. So beginning perhaps with what can be done to improve collaboration, structural issues, anything like that. Secondly, areas of collaboration we've not talked about much. Thirdly, change of government. Laura.
I'll start with your last question because that one gives me the most hope, just generally in life, change of government. I think obviously there are significant pieces of legislation that impact charities in terms of being able to kind of campaign and to maybe kind of collaborate with others. If we're looking at the kind of the campaigning, particularly during an election, you know, £10,000 is all you can spend as a charity across the whole of England unless you register the Electoral Commission. So they're clearly looking at how the current government are looking at how they can kind of reduce that impact, and so I think you know, if Labour do get in, or I should be more positive and say when Labour do get in, you know, is that going to be the top of their priority list? And I think the answer is no, but they have said that there will be things that they are kind of going to look at that could improve the environment, I would say, for charities and trade unions to kind of collaborate. I think and it may just be timing, and it may have nothing to do with the change of government. I think charities are also looking to increase who they speak to and looking at those opportunities to get out to different people that they may not connect with already, and it may just correspond with kind of the timing of a change of government. Yeah, so I guess that's the government one. In terms of the I can't think of any other potential areas at this point, but I'm sure that there are many other kind of potential areas that if we actually, you know, got into a room and started to kind of talk about the work that we're doing, the work that trade unions are doing, the areas for collaboration, I think would just kind of open up. In terms of talking about kind of structures, I suppose the difficulty that you know, trade unions are looking at you know, local trades councils that are in many areas kind of quite moribund, and you've also got kind of their own structures and committees and whatever that they're trying to keep going. Charities have similar type of maybe kind of resource pressures as well, and so I'm not sure whether a formal structure would be useful, but I wonder whether there's something around maybe developing a network and having at least the opportunity for kind of that NCVO, Akivo, TUC kind of initial conversation, and you know, there will be, I'm sure, the larger charities and the larger trade unions will kind of be involved in that, but it might also be that conduit to connect organisations that are working in a particular area but don't have those connections up. So I wonder whether something that isn't that formal but at least has some connectivity would be useful. And you know, our charity doesn't have a formal recognition agreement with a trade union, much to kind of my chagrin, and in the past couple of years has actually had the unions in, and sadly we weren't able to get enough people to be recognised, and so have a staff association. So I you know, I think there's definitely, and I hear it across the charity sector, that there are varying degrees of employment practices that are pretty poor. So I can imagine, you know, there would be certainly from workers in charities that interest maybe in what we can do to you know, protect our own rights, as well as potentially link up with people, beneficiaries who may benefit from kind of hearing about trade unions as well, because they may not be in that particular workplace. So yeah, I think there's a couple of things there.
Thank you. I think Angela wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I think there should be collaboration, and whether that's formal or informal would depend. I suppose it depends on the trade union and the community not-for-profit organisation. I do think there's a difference between, I suppose, the big charitable players and the smaller community-based ones, and then you've got some in between. And I kind of think whatever is agreed needs to take account of that, because I mean, I went to an event, it was only a couple of weeks ago, and we talked to a number of people working in a range of charities and community organisations, and their experience is just so variable. So if you work for Oxfam or the Red Cross, that's a very different experience to working for, say, a small faith-based organisation that provides community services or runs meals within those communities because of poverty, and it's just very different. And I mean, our branches have significant amounts of money which they are able to give to small community-based charities should they so wish. The money's the branches, and they can donate, and some branches do that quite well, and others just sit on a big pot of money, which I kind of think, you know, is just really frustrating. But I do also think we've done some, you know, I've done some work around the care sector in particular, and I think there is the opportunity for a better relationship. But I think the difficulty you've got is you've got very small charities who run, I don't know, care services, you know, for for very, very small patches. And it is, you know, it's about how you support that charity. I mean, I live in North Yorkshire, so it's very rural, but also supporting employees' rights. And I think unions will find that difficult. And I think by and large, they're probably more sympathetic to the smaller ones. I think the bigger ones, I mean, they're no different to, I don't know, Sainsbury's PLC, some of them. I mean, the 3 staff that came from Oxfam, I felt really sorry for them. I just thought, oh, that's really terrible. But I just think we just need to make those differences clear. And I don't think trade unions have any issues. That's interesting. I mean, I know we struggle. We limit the number of stands because we just get such a big rush for them. We don't charge, though. or if we do charge, it's minimal. And we're always having to say, no, we haven't got space this year. But I do think that is a real opportunity. And from my point of view, if for example, the Prostate Charity or Maternity Alliance, I think it would be really good for our members to have that face-to-face contact, because they wouldn't necessarily have it, if that makes sense.
I think, yes, I think it's important. I mean, I think the two takeaways that I've got from the last two contributions, I mean, one is the diversity of the sector, and whatever you discuss, however you discuss collaboration and the ways it's done, you've got to take that into account. You've got to take into account differences in size, in capacity, etc. The other takeaway, which I think warrants more attention, is we've not tended to talk about members either of CSOs or of unions at a local level. We've tended to talk about them as kind of an organisation. And I think you've got to start to disaggregate the different levels, the volunteers and the full-time people within the CSOs, the branch members, some of whom don't get directly involved in meetings, or a lot of them don't get involved in meetings, but full-time officials, etc. There are different interests in collaboration within those different groups, and we need to take them into account. I mean, one of the things that made me stop when I was doing some interviews before the operation was an introduction to a branch of Unite, which is a kind of branch that's not related to a particular employment sector. A lot of its members are retirees, are people who are unemployed, and it has a brief really to get involved in campaigning. I mean, that's the function. The branch that I interviewed, which was based in Glasgow, was actually supporting financially a number of small CSOs within the Glasgow area. It saw that as part of its brief. So we need perhaps to think not just about the national structures of organisations, but also the local, the branch level activity, and to what extent one can engage people at branch level in initiatives who might be not directly interested in the working for the union pay claim, but might, because of whatever reason, be interested in supporting particular CSO activity. So I think that's an area that the contributions were very useful to emphasise. Okay. Anybody else in this last area? We've reached Cinderella time. It's 2 minutes to go to when we're supposed to finish. I think Sarah's going to talk about Sean's got his hand up.
Yeah, can we go back to the last slide so it can act as an aid memoir, if that's okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, go on. I've got to be honest, I have spoken with Angela Rayner about this in terms of a change of government and what's likely to happen. She's made it quite clear that there's a promise to effectively row back on all the Trade Union Act in the first 100 days, and whether that still becomes a priority or whether she's got the what's the word I'm looking for? Well, I can't even remember the word now. You know, when she's got the mandate to actually do that with the number of MPs, I don't know. I do think in terms of a Labour government, we're more likely to have greater opportunities to lobby. But you know, MPs are very much, you know, as we all know, they toe a party line. They don't necessarily go with conscience and what our particular focus is there. But I suppose a couple of questions I've got really. I mean, in terms of collaboration, making it effective, I suppose if people go into any kind of collaboration negotiation, they've got to go in there with an understanding that it isn't necessarily going to be an equal payout on both sides. You know, one side potentially can get more than the other out of a collaborative situation, and that needs to be accepted. I don't know how people necessarily go into that with whatever mindset. Is there a awareness potentially as well? Because one of the key things is about access to, you know, signposting, accessing, you know, other members or groups of people you haven't ever kind of like you aren't naturally part of your own organisation. Is there awareness potentially through, you know, issues like data protection and GDPR, you know, in terms of the use of members' data that people are wary about, and that may be a bit of a hindrance potentially? I don't know.
Any response to Sean's question?
Kate?
Just to say that the way I've got around this, whether it's been organising webinars or anything else, is that we do everything through the union. So the union contact members directly. So we don't run into any kind of GDPR issues. And unions are usually quite keen to do that. And presumably it could work the other way as well, that you don't actually have to do it as a separate organisation. You can get the one with the contacts to do it.
Ways and means.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So have you covered was it a second question? Was there a second question, Sean, that you wanted to raise? Or
it was just more of an observation about the balance of the collaboration. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be 50-50, but you know, people were nodding away.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Kate, is that a legacy hand or is that a new hand? That I can tell. All right, thank you very much. So I'm just going to keep it very, very brief because I'm aware of the time. Let me just go. So first of all, thank you so much for all your contributions today and for making the time to, you know, contribute, share your experiences throughout the process of this project. And thank you to my colleagues here, both in the room and virtually, for all the contributions and the facilitation today. So the next steps are going to be further investigating the findings and in particular looking at some cases of collaboration. And as I said at the start of the presentation today, we're going to be looking at either successful cases or not of collaboration. So we've already identified about 180 cases, which is huge amount, and it's really great to see. However, unfortunately, we will not be able to have an investigation of each one of them. So we're going to go with about 12 to 16 cases for now. So the next step will be in the form of in-depth interviews with key informants, and ideally we would like to do them in pairs. So we would like to have both sides or parties in a collaboration in the same space and tease out from that discussion and interaction between the informants and participants, and hopefully get a lot more out of having individual interviews. But also we will be reliant on documents shared by the organisations involved in these case studies. So some of the key issues or points that we're going to be looking at are why collaboration, what are the benefits of it, things that we've covered today in this workshop, barriers of collaboration, the impacts, because it's so important that we maximize impact. So if collaborating for a cause or we're trying to achieve a certain purpose, it would be ideal to know what are the factors that would contribute to maximizing impact of that initiative and collaboration. What makes it more effective and how can we improve in general? So if you have any further you know, comments or questions, or you would like to engage with us even further, there are this email address. I know it sounds a very long one, but if you want to, I can put it in the chat. It's yeah, maybe I'll not going to do that now. I'll finish the presentation. I'll copy it and paste it in the chat. Yeah, so I'm aware of the time. I've already overrun. Do you have any further questions or comments before we leave? Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and hopefully we'll be in touch, and I'll see you again at some point in the future. Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.